Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. It's Q&A time. We're going to talk potential summer targets, the manager, the previous manager that so many of our fans can't move on from, and more on this special episode of the pod. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. It is match day. So I thought we'd do something a little bit different. If you're tuning in after a preview of the Nottingham Forest game, you can find it. It's our last full-length podcast. You'll find it on the channel. You'll also find it on whatever your favorite podcast app is as well. So we did look ahead to this game. We discussed Nottingham Forest. We discussed the starting 11 and various other bits and pieces. We reacted to Mikel Arteta's press conference. All of that is available on our previous episode. But here and now, we're going to do a bit of a Q&A because I have to say, over the last few days, it's all been really downbeat. And I understand it, right? It was that realization coming over us that the Premier League title is probably beyond us this season. Like, it's tough to take. And we kind of suspected it might be the case for a while. I think for a few months now, people have looked at the team, the injuries, our sort of lack of signings in January, and most people would have come to the conclusion that Arsenal are going to fall short. But when the reality of it sets in, like when it becomes very, very clear that that is the situation. And look, Mikel Arteta said over his dead body in terms of giving up on this Premier League title. But you have to say our chances of achieving that have been significantly reduced over the course of last weekend. And so there's people feeling downbeat. There's a sadness, I think, around the football club at the minute. There's some anger as well, and I can kind of understand where some of that comes from, of course. But we're in a place now where I think as a result of what happened at the weekend, we're starting to kind of reevaluate pretty much everything. We're talking about the manager and whether he's the guy that's going to get us over the line. We're talking about the club's ownership and the board. How ambitious are they? We're talking about individual players that 12 months ago, 6 months ago, even we'd have been talking about as some of the best in the world in their positions. We're talking about dips in form with regards to those players now. So I'm very, very conscious of the fact that when something goes wrong, and obviously losing at home to West Ham and then seeing Liverpool go and beat Manchester City the next day, that went wrong for us. That was a pretty big moment in the title race, I felt. It's only natural that when you suffer an event like that, or a course of events like that, you then start to reevaluate. And that's what I think we've been doing quite a bit of over the last few days. We spoke to Arsblog, Andrew earlier in the week on Monday. You can go back and have a listen to that episode if you like. And yesterday we sort of previewed the Nottingham Forest game and sort of discussed a little bit about the bigger picture as well, because it came up in the comments, and because some of Mikel Arteta's comments, I think, were sort of triggering, if you like, of that discussion. So yeah, we've done a lot of kind of soul searching, I think, over the last few days. And so what I wanted to do was give you guys, the listeners, the opportunity to shape a show, because it's all good me sitting down every morning and going through what I think the relevant talking points are, what I think we should discuss. And obviously, I'm really lucky to be able to do that to an amazing audience like you guys. But I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to throw your questions at me from the very outset. You shape the show. And I thought today would be a good time to do that, because we want to get a podcast out on Wednesday. I won't get the post-match one out until Thursday, because I am traveling up to Nottingham a little bit later today for the big game. You will get some match day reaction over on Patreon. If that's something you're interested in, you can sign up and support the Chronicles of a Gooner via Patreon. The link is in the description below. You'll get your match day reaction bit there, but the full podcast looking back at Nottingham Forest away is going to be with you on Thursday morning. So I figured now was a good time to take some of those questions. This will have some shelf life even after the game, because a lot of what we're going to discuss are more generic topics around Arsenal at the moment and more generic talking points. So yeah, really, really looking forward to this. With these shows, right, it's always a little bit of a risk as well, because you put this out, you say, send me your questions. And if the questions are rubbish, the show can be rubbish, right? But there are some fantastic questions that have come across to me over the course of the last 24 hours. Now, I haven't been able to pick all of them because it's too many, and we'll be sitting here for 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 hours, and nobody wants to listen to me rabbit on for that long. But I've picked out some questions that I think are really, really interesting. And I've picked out some questions that are not too similar to each other so that we can cover a wide variety of subjects. Big hello to the Chief in the chat. Good to see you, mate. He says, on Arteta, I'm happy to give him one more year given the circumstances of this season. Scott Maloney, because he's obviously seen in the thumbnail and in the title that we're going to discuss Justin Kluivert. He was the subject of one of the questions. Where are all these world-class players we were promised once we got into the Champions League? Our signings are worse now than before. We haven't signed Justin Kluivert yet, but we're going to talk about him because I think he's caught the eye of a fair few people this season, and he scored a stunning goal last night for Bournemouth at Brighton, and I think that's what's prompted the discussion around him again. But you'll get my thoughts on him a little bit later on. Okay, let's dive in without further ado into our first question, and we're going to take this one from Ross. Okay, so Ross says, do you think Nwaneri deserves the vacant number 10 shirt? So I'm not as big on the whole squad numbers thing as a lot of people. Like, obviously, I'm a massive man child. So the idea of like the right players having the right number is a really nice thing in my head. And it's something that I want to see us do where possible. But is it the kind of be all and end all for me? No. Does having a certain number give you a certain status within a squad? I think it does, but I also think it makes you much more marketable. And I think Ethan Nwaneri, 17 years old, he's come into the team. I think he's been outstanding. And I think he's shown real promise so far. Did I think he was great against West Ham the other day? No. But am I expecting, a really high level of consistency from a 17-year-old? No, I'm not, right? So you've got to judge him in the context, which is fair. And the fair context around Ethan Nwaneri is, look, 17 years old, being relied upon at the moment as a result of injuries, was probably going to be someone that came in and out of the team, that came off of the substitutes bench from time to time this season. But because of the problems we've had, he's been thrust into the limelight, and now we're asking a lot of him. I recognize we're asking a lot of him. And so my judgment of Ethan Nwaneri is always going to be softer than my judgment of some of the more senior players. And I think that's the right way to go. Does he deserve the number 10 shirt? Well, it's clear to me that Arsenal believe he is one for the future, and they believe that he is going to be one of the headline stars of this football club for many, many years to come. In terms of marketing him, which is something that football clubs do look to do with their biggest and best players, and as we say, I think he's on the trajectory to being one of those. I think giving him the number 10 shirt would be a massive win. The fact that he's homegrown as well, the fact that he's Arsenal through and through, one of our own, as the song goes, all of that really, really does help. I mean, Emile Smith-Rowe got given the number 10 shirt previously, right? And barely played. But it still meant something to the fans because Emile Smith-Rowe was one of our own, had come through the ranks, had these injury problems, but everybody was very much, I think, right up until the end, behind him and willing him on and wanting him to do well. And I think Ethan Nwaneri is going to get that same kind of unconditional love from the Arsenal fans. So to give him a shirt like the number 10 shirt, I don't think would upset anyone. I don't think you'd get too much pushback on that. But I'd also think from a kind of player management perspective, maybe you want to hold something like that back. Maybe you want to give someone, maybe you don't want to give someone too much too soon. And again, to me, shirt numbers don't really matter that much. But to a young player coming up and to look at some of the number 10s that have gone before him, he'd probably be really chuffed and really excited about that. Do you want to give it to him now, or do you want to hold it back from him? I guess that's the debate and that's the discussion to be had. But so if he continues on the trajectory that he is, I'd have no objections with him being the number 10. The only other issue is, when you talk about this, is we're going to have to do some major business in the summer. And we're talking a lot about strikers. We're talking a lot about creative players. We're talking about wingers. We're talking about all sorts of positions, right? Positions that still need addressing. Do you want to hold that back in case you can use it as a sweetener for one of those players? Now, I'm not saying that their decision on whether they come to Arsenal or not will be purely based on whether they get the number 10 shirt or not. But look, to me, again, it doesn't mean a massive amount, but to a lot of people, it does. And so it's, for me, I would probably lean to the side of no, don't give Ethan Nwaneri the number 10 shirt for next season. Because A, I don't want to give him too much too soon, although he deserves it, of course. That's kind of my mentality when it comes to young players and them finding their way. I think you've got to earn every stripe. And as you do that, it means more. When you get to those milestones, it gives you that extra bit of encouragement, etc., etc. So for me, I would hold it back from him. Personally, that's my answer, because I think that you might find yourself in a situation come the summer where you sign a more senior player who you can give that to, who will sell more shirts in the immediate aftermath of giving them that number in the short term, etc., etc. So no, for me, no. I'm not giving him the number 10 shirt next season, but it's not because he's not a good footballer. It's not because he doesn't deserve it. I think I'd like to see who comes in the summer and then make that decision. Is where I'm going to leave this one. Tough question, that. You got me thinking. I did read these questions in advance, but did I sit down and prepare answers for them? No, I didn't. I very much have sort of taken these on off the cuff, and I think, a lot of people are in agreement that maybe it's just a little bit too early for that. Jeff Jones makes the point, Gallas had the number 10. That's true. That didn't go well, did it? Brad says that brings pressure to him as well, which is also a really, really good point, I think. So, for instance, like if we got Benjamin Sesko in the summer, or we got Nico Williams, and then you've already got, like, let's say Martinelli at the club on number 11, etc., etc. Do you end up in a situation where Nico Williams goes, I want the number 10 shirt? And then are you going to prioritize the guy that you paid big money for to get in, that you're going to sell a loads of shirts off the back of, or are you going to give it to the youngster? Now, the youngster is great, and I'd love to see him continue in this trajectory and go on to be one of our all-time greats. I really do believe the talent is there for him to achieve that. But at the same time, it might be a little bit too soon. It might be a little bit too soon. Laughing Man says, let's see how many he scores for the rest of the year. Then we can decide. Yeah, I love that. Love that. Right, let's move on to the next question. Let's go to Paps the Gooner, who says, will we ever sign someone who can create something from nothing? Bring me Cunha. It does feel like that is the profile of player that we're missing. That spontaneous maverick that can just create and produce, as you say, something from nothing. We don't have enough of those players in the squad, and I think that's been an issue for us for quite some time now. We've discussed it on the pod previously. Do we have enough players that are willing to say, I'm going to break free from the system and I'm going to go off and I'm going to do my own thing? And do we, as a system, accommodate for players like that? That's the other kind of question, right? Let's say, for instance, you have your Alexis Sanchez, who was a player that could create something out of nothing. I've often wondered if Alexis Sanchez would fit into a Mikel Arteta team, because I wonder whether he'd get that license to go and make things happen in the way that Arsene Wenger used to give it to him, in the way that Arsene Wenger used to give it to Mesut Ozil. Would those types of players be welcome in a Mikel Arteta system? Now, I think it's kind of risk versus reward. If the player is giving you enough going forward, I think you should be willing as a manager to kind of let them free. And you should be willing as a manager to try and find other ways of maybe plugging the spaces that they vacate as a result. Who that player is, I don't know. You say, perhaps, bring me Cunha, and I liked Cunha quite a bit when we were talking about him in the January window. But when it became apparent that Wolves were going to put some hefty price tag on him, which is understandable, right? Because their situation in the league, particularly at that time, was looking really, really precarious. I mean, if I look at the league table now, they've managed to just buy themselves a bit of space, bit of breathing space. I think there's 5 points between Wolves and Ipswich. Of course, Ipswich play a game in hand, which could see them close that gap to 2 points, which means that Wolves are right down in there. But there's been a little bit of an upturn from Wolves recently, and that upturn has been largely due to Matheus Cunha. So his importance and significance to that team is clear for everybody to see. When it became apparent that this was going to cost a hell of a lot of money, my opinion on it started to change a little bit. If it was 40 million quid, I probably would have done it. When you start getting into the sort of 50, 60, 65 million pound sphere, then I'm looking at this a little bit differently. But you're right to use him as an example of a player that can create something from nothing, because he's a centre forward on paper, but we see him drift all over the place. And Again, I come back to that point. Will that type of player thrive in a Mikel Arteta side? Because that type of player would be asked to press really aggressively for Mikel Arteta. Now, can you be part of a rigid shape and system and a very clear shape and system and press in the way that Mikel wants you to, if you also have that license to go wandering and do whatever it is that you think is right? If you need to goal hang, you got to goal hang. If you need to go and plonk yourself out on the left-hand side in between the fullback and the centre-back, you should be able to do that. In a system where there is so much rehearsal, if you like, would that work? Would be my question. But personally, on a personal level, I feel like those types of players are exactly what we're missing. We don't have any of those in the squad anymore. Martin Odegaard is probably the one midfield player that we have that will go into different pockets and will try and make things happen and has that real intelligence. And no, let me say that again, because it sounds like I'm saying the others aren't intelligent. What I'm saying is that Martin Odegaard is that kind of creative force, right? That will go sort of drifting, but he is also a system player to a point as well. And I think that's what differentiates Martin Odegaard from some of the more traditional number 10s. And it's why a lot of us have looked at him recently as more of an 8 than a 10. Do we have room for this type of player? Would be my pushback to that question. Matheus Cunha is a good player. I like him, but I'm not paying upwards of 60 million quid for him. That would be sort of my stance on it if I was in charge of the club. Sud Sahar says, how long do we carry on with Arteta? Now, this was quite a common question. It wasn't worded as nicely as this in a lot of examples. There was, when are we going to get him out? This guy's bloody useless. He's taking us backwards, rah, 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 all that rubbish. I had plenty of those messages over the last sort of 24 hours. And I picked this one because I thought this was the one that was respectfully worded, if you like. Look, how long do we carry on with Mikel Arteta? I think you get a feeling when it's the end of a road. And although the last couple of seasons have ended in disappointment in terms of us not winning the Premier League, I always felt like there was so much more to come. And so I was excited. The sadness of missing out on the Premier League title was there and lingering for a while. But as the summers went on and you started to kind of really take stock of how far we'd come and the progress that we'd made, I would always go into the next season feeling really, really excited and positive. That was my feeling going into the second season that we challenged. And that was my feeling going into this season as well, where we should have challenged a lot closer, where we should be challenging a lot closer. Maybe you'd argue we should be winning it. But then I think about the circumstances around why we are where we are. And people keep saying, you're making excuses for Arteta. You're giving him a get out of jail free card. No, I think you have to understand the context. If you ignore that, your analysis is flawed. Your analysis is completely and utterly flawed if you ignore all of the other factors at play here. And this is what makes football the most fascinating sport on the planet for me. The fact that there are so many factors, the fact that there are so many variables, that's why we love it so much. You can't ignore those variables when it suits you. And so on the question of how long do we carry on with Mikel Arteta, I can't give you an answer because I will say that it's time to move on from Mikel Arteta when I get the feeling that this can go no more. I'm not there. Had we dropped off the way we have this season without all those other variables at play, without all those other factors, let's say everybody was fit, everybody was underperforming, Mikel Arteta's, tinkling with this and tinkling with that, and it's not working. Then I'd sit there and I'd go, you know what? Have you run out of ideas? Maybe you run out of ideas. But I just think when you look at the context and you look at where we are, like people act as if second place is a disaster. It's not a disaster. I'll tell you what's a disaster. Tottenham Hotspur being down in 13th is a disaster. Manchester United being down in 15th place. That is a disaster. Arsenal being short of a team that have won 19 of their 27 games, that have lost just once this season in Liverpool. That is not a disaster. Is it the heights that we hoped we would achieve going into this season? No, of course it's not. Have we drawn too many games this season? Probably. Have we wasted opportunities in matches to go and win games by taking chances, which can be linked back to the fact that we don't have that out-and-out goal scorer? Yeah, of course. But the January window taught me that, while we always focus on the manager and while we always look hard at the manager, he wasn't the one that didn't want us to get signings in January. He would never have sat in the press conferences the way he did, speaking so candidly about the fact that we needed reinforcement in that area if he didn't believe that and wasn't pushing for that in the background. It just didn't happen for various other reasons. And so I'm not at the point where I'm looking at what Mikel Arteta says or does, and I'm in major disagreement. Towards the end of the Wenger tenure, I looked at the atmosphere around the football club. I looked at some of the decisions he was making, some of the recruitment that he was involved in. And I did look at it and go, God, this has got no more. This hasn't got the legs. This cannot go any further. And you got that gut feeling of when it was the right time. We got the gut feeling around Unai Emery as well. I remember the Eintracht Frankfurt game. I remember walking away from that game thinking, he ain't going to be here tomorrow. And that was the case. I'm not there yet with Mikel Arteta. And so in answer to your question, I don't think you can put a specific time frame on it. I don't think you can say, well, let's give him another 6 months or let's give him another 12 months, because there are so many variables at play here. You have to just assess his suitability to the role on an ongoing rolling basis. And I believe that right now he is the right guy for Arsenal. And I believe that right now, having taken us forward in the way that he has, he deserves us to stick with him during a period where so many things have gone wrong. And we're not just talking about injuries. We're talking about red cards. We're talking about players not sticking the ball in the back of the net in key moments, which you can argue he has some influence over depending on who he picks, of course. But, there are plenty of managers that lost their jobs because players didn't find the back of the net or defenders made mistakes at key moments. It's not always in the manager's hands, right? They're not the ones out there trying to do the business. Like, they are managing a team. I'm sure lots of you have been in situations in your careers where you've been management. Can you be held accountable for every single action, every single mistake, every single issue that comes up in your team? I was a manager, in various departments in a bank in the past, and there will be times where members of staff would mess up. I would mess up at times as well. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but people would mess up. And I used to think, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble for this. And the truth is, this has nothing to do with me. I'd have never done that myself. So yeah, I think on this, how long do we carry on with Mikel Arteta? I think you gotta go with your gut to a degree, and you got to go with the facts. And the facts are that we haven't. I mean, people will say we've regressed, but we're still second. Okay. We've still got the Champions League to play for. Let's assess at the end of the season whether or not we've regressed or not. And if we think that we have regressed, and then once we take in all the variables to account, if we then think that actually there was more that Mikel Arteta could have done, then we can start having a conversation about whether or not us not winning the Premier League title is on him or if it's on those other factors. And if it's more so on those other factors, then I think based on the credit that he has in the bank, he deserves to be given more time. It's a feeling thing for me. It's a feeling thing. I don't think the players have given up on him. I don't think the players have down tools on him. I don't think he's lost the dressing room. So I don't think there's an urgency to change manager. Not for me. GKAFC says, given there are reports of Arsenal to go big in the summer, how do you think we structure the additional signings? I've heard 2 strikers might come in, but we can't move Jesus on as he won't pass a medical. I think outgoings are really important. Sorry, on the screen, it's just cut that a bit out. But the rest of the question was, I've heard 2 strikers might come in, but we can't move on Jesus as he won't be fit to pass any medical by the end of the window. I believe outgoings will be key here. Okay, so in terms of the structure of the signings, I think for me, I think it does depend to a degree on outgoings. I think there are needs that we have already, regardless of who stays or who goes. So I think we need a striker. I think we need another winger. I think we need another goalkeeper. because beyond David Raya, I'm not particularly confident in what we have. I think outside of that, we're going to need another midfielder. And that is regardless of whether Jorginho and Partey move on. If they both move on, I think we need two midfielders. If one moves on, unless you include Nwaneri in that now, and unless you include Miles Lewis-Skelly in that. Now, I would seriously consider those two as midfield options. So maybe I'll sort of backtrack on that and say that we definitely need one. We've obviously got Mikel Merino. Kai Havertz is an option there as well. I know a lot of people don't like that, but it is an option realistically. We saw Mikel Arteta use Alexander Zinchenko as a midfield option as well, although I do think he might be leaving the club this summer. Look, for me, it's got to be striker first, winger, goalkeeper, and one midfielder. So by my estimations, we need four players, I beg your pardon, this summer. Two in attack, one in the midfield, and one in goal. That's the absolute minimum that Arsenal can do. And I think that's on the basis of us losing one of Partey or Jorginho. If we lose them both, that maybe changes things. And maybe we've got to look at it slightly differently. But then I would argue that with the emergence of Miles Lewis-Skelly, who I think would do better in midfield and would be on a much better footing to then fulfill his full potential in a midfield, I think that could be the way to go as well. So, yeah, look, four players is what I'm looking at going into the summer. So it signals that we need to have a really, really big summer again. That's how I would structure it. On the Gabriel Jesus thing, look, we're really unlucky. He's really unlucky that he suffered this ACL injury. You got to allow the guy to get back fit. We allowed Mohamed El-Neni to do it, didn't we? We kept him at the club. And it was clear from a long time prior that he didn't have a future at Arsenal. Yet we still did the right thing, I believe, as a football club and gave him the opportunity to recover before he then moved on. With Gabby Jesus, the thing that really hurt me about that injury was that we just started to see him kind of rediscover his confidence and get back to the level that we saw from him when he first arrived at the football club, and bang, just as he was in the goals, just as he was in red hot form, he goes down with this injury and he's done. And that one really, really hurt me this season. Like, do I think that we'd be fine with just him as a striking option right now? Probably not. I still think we'd be a little bit short, that we'd be in a hell of a better position than the one that we find ourselves in currently. So we have been unlucky there. People will argue that he's had knee issues before. And so, we should have been always sort of open to the fact and aware of the fact, I guess, that, this was a possibility that Jesus would suffer a serious injury. I think it's the other one that he's done this time, but, I did an ACL, and again, I don't want to make this comparison too sort of too strongly because it's different, but you do end up putting more on your other knee when you've had an ACL on the other one, and that might be what's caused this problem that he's suffered. But hey, so for me, it's four players that I think we should be looking at in the summer: goalkeeper, midfielder, winger, striker. That's where I would be looking. That's how I would structure the window. Okay. Ryan Cooley says, curious to know your thoughts on why broadcasters and Arsenal journalists assume we're getting Zubimendi. If Liverpool win the league and we have a bad finish, is it not far more likely that he goes to Liverpool? So the reason people are talking about Martin Zubimendi as a concrete option for Arsenal this summer is not because people think it's a done deal. It's not because people think that there's no chance or possibility that he ends up elsewhere, but it's because, it's been reported by a good journalist, a well respected journalist, that Arsenal have made some real good progress in terms of convincing Martin Zubimendi that Arsenal is the place for him. So it's not something that people have plucked out of the air. Having said that, I don't think we should be talking about Martin Zubimendi as if it's done. I don't think we should be talking about him as if it's a guarantee that he ends up at Arsenal, because as I've said, there's a lot of football still to be played. It might not just be Liverpool coming in for him come the summer. It could be Real Madrid as well. There were reports coming out of Spain not that long ago that Real Madrid were working behind the scenes to try and do a deal for Martin Zubimendi. So I guess what I'm saying here is there's no smoke without fire. Like, people aren't talking about Zubimendi because they've just plucked it out of the air. There is a feeling, and that is based on a report from a very reputable journalist. I think it was Sammy Mockbell, correct me if I've got that wrong, that reported that first. And so people are looking at that as a credible report and thinking, okay, that increases the chances of him ending up at Arsenal. And therefore, he's coming up in conversations. But it's not a done deal. It's not a given. Of course, nothing is in football. Just before I move on to the next question, I did mention when we were talking about how long we should stick with Mikel Arteta for, that he's got some credit in the bank. He has with me. Andrew J54 says, Harry, please clarify what credit Arteta has. What I find really, really strange, okay, among Arsenal fans, and this is not me having a go at Andrew specifically, so please don't take it that way. This is a more general criticism I have of some of the analysis around Mikel Arteta. What I find really, really strange is how if you went back in a time machine, right, to pre-Mikel Arteta, as far as I'm concerned, as an Arsenal supporter, someone who started following the club probably in 1996, just before Arsene Wenger took charge, it had never gotten as bad as it did before Arteta came in for me. Like, people talked about the end of the Wenger era, and yeah, it weren't great. But under Arsene Wenger, I can tell you this. I turned up to every single home game, at least. Not the away ones, but every single home game, believing that no matter who we played against, we were capable of beating them. Because Arsene Wenger's style of football prioritized talented players, and he always, even at the worst of times, had an Alexis Sanchez, a Robin van Persie, a Mesut Ozil, someone special. He always had that kind of player within the ranks. And so that always gave me belief and confidence that with the freedom that he gives them, that they could impact the game and you could win a game. Even you go back to people like Emmanuel Adebayor. You know, like, even he was a really, really effective player for Arsenal for a long, long time. The point I'm trying to make here is that I always believed that Arsenal had a chance. Then Arsene Wenger left. It went south. Unai Emery came in. And for me, that was the second season of Unai Emery, which obviously didn't last the entirety of. That was rock bottom. That was rock bottom. We'd gone to a European final the year before. A Europa League final is a nice achievement, of course. But at the same time, we weren't in the Champions League, which was, of course, disappointing. We got our asses handed to us by a London rival in that final. And then we missed out on the top four by a point, because Unai Emery managed to, or I say managed to, decided to prioritize the Europa League over the Premier League. And we dropped points in back-to-back games against Palace and Brighton at home. And we ended up missing out on the top four. And then we screwed up the Europa League final terribly. Okay. We were at rock bottom. Look at where we were in the table when Unai Emery got sacked. We were at rock bottom. We had a squad of terrible players. We were so overly reliant and dependent on Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. We had to start terminating contracts post Unai Emery. And it's not all Unai Emery's fault, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. There were people upstairs making calls and making decisions that were really bad for us as a football club, right? It was a collective failure. There's no getting away from that. I'm not seeking to pin this all on Unai Emery. But my point is that Arsenal had hit rock bottom as far as I was concerned. And there may be older supporters than me. My dad used to say this to me. No, this is not the worst we've ever been. Believe me, we've been worse before. But for me, that was the worst we'd ever been. And so in comes Mikel Arteta, right? Sits down, gives this press conference and tells everybody that everything's broken. This is not the club that I left. This is not the club that I used to know. We need to fix X, Y, Z. It was as if he'd read our minds and told us everything that we thought was the problems were actually the problems. And he gave us a clear map and road sort of path, if you like, as to how we were going to get back to being the Arsenal. You think about all the challenges he's had along the way. You think about all the setbacks he's had along the way. You think about some of the tough decisions he's had to make along the way. And to be back at the top of the Premier League and challenging for league titles again, to be back in the mindset where top four is not good enough, only challenging for the Premier League is good enough, and to have come on even further from that to a point now where we look like we're not going to win the Premier League and everyone's bloody down and out about it, rather than going, oh my God, second's much better than fourth. That in itself shows you that the team has taken strides forward. We've got two of the best centre-halves in world football. We've got a top goalkeeper. We've got a fantastic fullback in Ben White, who's been out for most of the season. We bought Declan Rice into the club, who was, the apple of so many people's eyes during that period of time. We've got Bukayo Saka. We've got Ethan Nwaneri coming through. We've brought youngsters through in the process. Arsenal are in a much healthier, much better place than they were when Mikel Arteta took over. And therefore, for me, he has credit in the bank. Is the job complete? No, it's not. Because we need to win the big trophies for the job to be complete. But that doesn't take away from the progress that he's made. And that's why he has credit for me. Who are you going to go and get tomorrow that's going to do better? That everybody always says, sack this person, sack that person. Right, who do you bring in to replace them? Give me an option. Give me an option. Let's hear. I'd love to hear from you guys in terms of options. But that's why Mikel Arteta's got credit in the bank for me. And some people don't like that because some people like to hold their standards up really, really high when it suits them. And when it comes to the Mikel Arteta debate, it suits them to say, well, the only standard that's acceptable is being league title winners, right? But those same people, in a lot of instances, are telling you that we should have stuck with Unai Emery. How are Aston Villa doing right now under Unai Emery in the Premier League? Anyone see their game last night? Battered at Crystal Palace. They're in mid-table. So if we want to talk about regression, second from second is seen as regression when we're judging Mikel Arteta. But fourth down to 10th when we're looking at Unai Emery, that's not seen as regression at all. That's the double standard that we get when we hear the Unai Emery stuff. And I know Andrew didn't bring up Unai Emery specifically, but I've got really irritated by how many people have sort of gone, oh, we should have stuck with Emery over the last few days. What on earth are you lot smoking? Give it a rest. It's not doing you any good. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Let's talk Emery, because that's the next question. Luke, are we seeing the Emery cycle again at Villa? There's been clear regression this season. Look, having said what I just said about Unai Emery, because I think I've been drawn into the kind of childish, well, let's be really binary about everything and say, well, it's either success or failure without talking about context when we're discussing Emery, because that's what people do when it comes to Arteta. If I wanted to be that guy, I'd say, yeah, well, clear regression. He needs to go. He's taking him backwards. Spent a lot of money. Spent a lot of money at Aston Villa. Brought in a lot of players in a very short period of time. And having got to the top four, they needed to cement that. They needed to build on that. And they're not going to build on that. They might not even be in Europe next season, looking at them and their league position at the moment. But I'm fairer than that. And because I'm fairer than that, I'm going to take into account the fact that they've had a really taxing Champions League campaign. First of all, it's their first experience of the Champions League in a really, really long time. Second of all, they've had to do it for the first time in a long time with the new format, which means more games, which means a more intense schedule. So I do think that for that reason, you can understand why Villa have dropped off a little bit. If I were a Villa fan, I wouldn't be calling for Unai Emery's head, but I'd be a little bit frustrated by the fact that, in order to go forward as a football club, they need to be regulars in the Champions League. And it looks like they might not achieve that for next season because their league form has really hit a bit of a brick wall. But yeah, let's see what happens. But the Unai Emery cycle thing, it happens. It is a thing. And you can find it going back through all of his jobs in the past. There always comes a point with Unai Emery where it's where it's cup or league. And he chooses cup every single time. And that often impacts his league form. I think Unai Emery only finished second or above in one of his last 15 seasons as a manager. I read that stat somewhere. It might be slightly inaccurate, but it's there or thereabouts. And that was with PSG. Outside of that, he hasn't finished in the top two for 15 odd years because he's a cup guy. That's what he is. And so is the cycle kicking in again where he starts to become a little bit obsessed about silverware and ignores the other stuff? Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Is that the right way to be? Some people would argue it is. Don't know. Not here to judge. But my point is, I think you're right. I think we are seeing that cycle click in to gear again. Just going back to Andrew, he says you've still not clarified the credit. Oh my God, talking about Mikel Arteta. I literally just went on a 5-minute impassioned rant about how he took the club from being on its knees in the state it was in to being in a position where we're now demanding that we win the Premier League and anything else is failure. That's why he has credit in the bank, because of the journey he's taken the club on, the progress that the club has made under his tenure. The job isn't finished, as I've said, but that's my clarification. I don't know how clearer I can be. I don't know how much more clearer I can be. He's got credit in the bank because he's taken us forward. And as long as a club keeps moving forward, can you ever really call a manager a failure? I don't think you can. Right, before we move on, because we've got a few more questions and I've got some time to take a few of yours from the live chat. So we'll do some of that as well. Make sure, if you haven't done so already, guys, you leave a like on the video. Can we get to 100 likes on YouTube? That would really, really help. If you're watching us on X, why not come over to the YouTube channel, subscribe, then you'll get access to every single one of our episodes. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform as well. And if you want to go one further and support us, you can do so via patreon.com/Chronicles. Is it Chronicles AFC or the Chronicles of Aguna? I never remember that. Hold on. I'll tell you now. The Chronicles of Aguna. The link is in the description anyway to make it easy. You could just click on it. Yeah, thank you for your support. But remember to hit those likes. Right then, let's take this one from Piero43. Arteta says we've made great strides this season. Is he crazy? Now, this is based on something that Mikel Arteta said in, I think, the embargoed section of his press conference yesterday, looking ahead to the Nottingham Forest game. He said, we've made great strides, basically, because any other team playing with the number of red cards that we've had, with the injuries that we've had, would probably be in mid-table and certainly wouldn't be in the Champions League anymore. Do I agree with this? Do I think he's crazy? Well, I don't think he's crazy, for starters, because I think he's a very, very intelligent man. I think he's a very passionate person, particularly when it comes to football and particularly when it comes to this football club. We can feel that from him, I think. What I think it is with Mikel Arteta, and I think this is a natural reaction that people sort of default to when they feel like they're being attacked. I think you can get overly defensive. And I think while it is true that Arsenal being in second in the context of things is far from a disaster, I don't think it's a major success either. I think the truth is somewhere in between. Is it Arsenal making great strides? Not quite for me. But is it a disaster? Certainly not. So the answer is somewhere in the middle. But I think when you feel like you are being attacked, when you feel like everybody's coming at you, and that people are misunderstanding you, and that people maybe don't appreciate the environment and the difficulties that you've had to work against throughout the course of the season, I think it's natural to get that little bit overly defensive. And I think that's what Mikel Arteta's done here. I think his words will be taken out of context, and I think his words were maybe wrong in this instance. But I think it is because he feels like he's being attacked. Like, people are saying, well, can Mikel Arteta do this? Can he do that? This Arsenal team have regressed. This Arsenal team are rubbish, blah, blah, blah. Yet last season, when Liverpool had a massive drop-off, and remember, they were at the top of the league for quite some time and ended up dropping off quite significantly, there seemed to be so much more sympathy and so much more coverage of the issues that they were facing, the injuries, the burnout, all the rest of it, the fixture schedule. There seemed to be so much more sympathy for Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. And maybe that's because Jurgen Klopp had won the Premier League and had won the Champions League and sort of other bits and pieces as well. And maybe as a result of that, people felt he had that credit in the bank that maybe Mikel Arteta doesn't when we're having these types of conversations. But I think Mikel Arteta feels attacked. I think he feels like people's analysis is flawed. I think that he feels like people are overlooking the issues that we've had to deal with this season. And in that, he's got a bit over the defensive, and I think he's gone a bit over the top in his words there. I don't think he's gone crazy, but I agree that I don't think that saying, we've taken great strides, or however it is exactly that he worded it, I don't think that that's I don't think that's something that everybody kind of wants to hear right now. But hey, you feel like you're being attacked, you come out swinging, don't you? And that's what it feels like Mikel Arteta's done. Right, I'm going to take a couple of your questions from the live chat, but we're going to touch on the Justin Kluivert one first. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're new and if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. I'm getting faster at doing that, trying to waste less of your time. I'll pick 2 or 3 questions from the chat to wrap up, but let's move on to this one then. Is Justin Kluivert the winger that we need? He's having an amazing season for Bournemouth. And he is. He really, really is having an amazing season for Bournemouth, isn't he? He's showing that bit of X factor. He's showing quality, scoring fantastic goals, and he's been a major surprise in a good way, I think, in terms of the Premier League this season. He's 25 years old, Justin Kluivert. Nearly called him Patrick Kluivert, like his old man. And he's had a bit of a sort of strange career, because I remember when he first kind of came to prominence. He was at Ajax and he joined Roma back in 2018 for, I think it was just under 20 million euros. From Roma, he went on loan to Leipzig. From Roma, he went on loan to Nice. He also spent some time at Valencia on loan. And eventually, in July 2023, Bournemouth came in and signed him for about 10 million euros from Roma. Okay, so this is a guy that, when he was really young, looked really, really promising and really, really exciting, and then maybe didn't live up to that expectation and didn't quite hit those heights. Some players develop at different times. There are some players that at 18, 19, 20 years old, they look like the finished article, and you're, blown away by it. You're sort of perplexed by how a player at that age can look so mature and so ready to go. And there are other players that, come to prominence at 24, 25, sometimes even a little bit later. You think of like Jamie Vardy and Olivier Giroud, for instance. You think about the levels they went on to hit and where they were maybe just only a few years prior, and what the consensus was about where their career was headed. It can happen. People develop at different times. He is having a really, really good season, man. Like really, really good. He's got 12 Premier League goals in 26 games. That's nearly 1 in 2. He's not a centre forward. He's a winger. He's also got 5 assists. He's got a goal in the FA Cup as well. So in total, he's got 13 goals this season. It's a really, really good return. And if you look at his transfer market value chart, it was really, really high at one stage. His market value in 2019 was, according to them, about 25 million euros. And then it took a massive dip. And it's sort of been bouncing along in a kind of even keel ever since. And now it's shot back up to a similar amount, around about that 22 to 25 million range. So he's having an outstanding season. Really enjoying watching him play. Really enjoying some of his goals as well that are top quality. Love his kind of shoot on sight policy. Really, really enjoy watching him. Is he someone that I would go out and move for in the summer, though? Well, I'm not so sure. I talked about him maybe developing a little bit later than some of the others, and I certainly feel that that's the case. What works in his favor is that he's got big club experience. He's played for Ajax, he's played for Roma, he's played for Valencia. These are big football clubs where there's a lot of pressure. And so he's probably better equipped than some of your sort of middle-of-the-road Premier League players, in that he's had that experience and he's worked in those environments. But maybe having dropped down, and I mean this with all due respect to a club of the size of Bournemouth, maybe that suited him down to a T. Maybe he is better off being the big fish in the small pond rather than the other way around. And it does feel like, because I haven't seen this level of consistency from Justin Kluivert previously in his career, although there's been flashes, of course, it's why he had the reputation that he did. Because I haven't seen this level of consistency before with him, I'm reluctant to say that Arsenal should go out and break the bank to get Justin Kluivert. I feel like Bournemouth and Andoni Iraola is the right environment for him. And so, I'm going to leave it at that with Justin Kluivert. Let me know your thoughts. Would you sign him? If so, how much would you pay for him? I'd love to hear from you guys on that as well. Okay, let's take a few of your questions then from the live chat. Sniper Scope says, Harry, answer me this then. Why don't we do that little bit extra, buying a striker to take us over the line? The whole world knows that we need that piece. I can't answer that question because I don't know. I was as vocal as anybody throughout the January window about the fact that I felt that we needed one, and we didn't get one. And I was upset about that. I was frustrated by that. We voiced that many, many times on this podcast. Why didn't we do it? I don't know. Have they got something big lined up in the summer and they didn't want to jeopardize that or the affordability of that? We're going to find out in the summer. And if they go and get an Isak or a Sesko, you probably sit there and go, disappointed that we didn't do anything in January. We probably still should have done a short-term thing in January. But ultimately, we got the guy that we really wanted. And you might look at it in a much more positive light. If we go through a summer of moving from one target to the next and trying to get this player and then failing and then having to, then people are going to say, hold on a minute, what the hell did you keep your powder dry for in January? Because I thought one of the reasons was you had something lined up. And I know they've never said that, but that's the assumption that people will make naturally, when you get to that kind of situation and into that position. Jid says, so who do you sell then, Harry? If you say that we need another a striker and another winger, we already have 8 players for the front 3 positions, including players on loan. When you say players on loan, do you mean players that we've got loaned out? Because if they've been loaned out, they, as far as I'm concerned, don't have a future at Arsenal. So I discard those players. I don't include Fabio Vieira in my long-term planning, for instance. I just don't. I don't include Reece Nelson in that either. So I don't know that it's 8 players. But what I will say is this. We need competition. We need different types of options. And we need to protect ourselves against injury crisis, because these injuries are becoming more and more common in the modern game. The bigger this and the harder and the tougher and the thicker the schedule gets, the more likely it is that you lose players with these types of injuries. So we need to adapt to the times as well. And when I talk about injuries, the volume of injuries, generally speaking, across the Premier League this season is ridiculous. It isn't just an Arsenal problem. Have we had it worse than most this season? I would argue, yeah, probably. And have we been really unlucky that it's all come in a similar area? Yeah, of course. But I still think we need to have depth. I think we need to have 6, 7 options at the absolute minimum. And the better the options, the better that they will cope in the absence of one of those key components. Like if you had a left winger that was contributing more than Trossard or Martinelli have this season, and then you lose Saka, it's not such a big deal. Do you know what I mean? If you have a centre forward that's going to score you 30 goals in the season and you lose Bukayo Saka, it's not as big of a deal. If you have a sort of left winger that's only going to contribute 4 or 5 goals throughout the entirety of the campaign, then losing your main goal source becomes a massive issue. So we talk a lot about spreading goals around the team. The more you up-level yourself in different positions, the less of an impact losing one will have. So that's how I see it. And that's why I think that it's a balance to be found between getting enough players, having the right volume of players, but also having the highest quality of players as well. Okay, I think I'm going to take one more. Imran says, in April, season ticket demands will be made by the club. How can they justify any potential increases this year? I don't know if it'll be April or May. I think it'll probably be May that you start to hear stuff about the season ticket. Look, for me, the pricing thing, I'd love to see the club just go, we're putting the brakes on this, and although they will say that, season ticket prices have not increased or whatever, I think I'm struggling a little bit with the season ticket at the moment. Not because I've got one, okay? I work at a lot of the games right now, so I don't use it very often these days. And what I did this year was share it with my brother, right? So that's what we do to make sure that we can do it. But then we get situations like the PSV game coming up now, right? So for those of you that need a reminder, from I think it's midday today until midday on Friday, if you're a season ticket holder, you'll need to log in and buy your PSV Eindhoven ticket. Where I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet is not about the sort of price of the 19 games in the league. In the past, we used to get 7 cup games, right? Regardless of what they were. And then they would give you the ticket if you wanted it. You could opt out. And if you took on extra tickets, it would be reflected in your renewal price, right? I over the last few years have forked out a lot of money buying extra tickets on top of my season ticket. Because, like, for example, right, PSV Eindhoven, I don't know if I'm going to be allocated that game to work on, right? So I'm going to buy the ticket. Now, I know other people are in different positions where they're going out and buying those tickets because they don't have a chance of working at the game. And so I'm not trying to claim that my position is worse, right? But I'm basically going to log in and spend like 70, 80 quid on a game. And I just, I know some people prefer it, the option to opt out, the option not to go on to the additional games and all the rest of it. I don't mind buying the additional tickets if that's the way it works. But I think some of the prices are extortionate. For a lower tier ticket in Block 6, what I paid for Porto last year and what I paid for Bayern Munich last year in the Champions League was well over the top. Well over the top. I didn't even end up using either of them. I ended up giving them onto my brother and whatever. But like, they give you a really short window and zero discount in comparison to someone that was buying a ticket off the street. And I don't like that. I think as season ticket holders, we deserve a bit more loyalty. And I think that, okay, you're gonna charge us extra for it, fine, but do it at a discounted rate. But that doesn't happen. And that frustrates me. Well, not to my knowledge anyway. As far as I'm concerned, it's not a discounted rate because the prices look really big to me. Someone can tell me if I'm wrong. And I'm happy to be corrected on that. But like the thought of like having to fork out like 70, 80 quid every time we make it around further in the Champions League just to make sure I've got a seat, it's hard on top of what you've paid already for the season ticket. So I'm not the biggest fan of the way the season tickets are working right now. I'm not the biggest fan of the ballot system. I'm not the biggest fan of how the memberships are working. I think all of that stuff needs to be reviewed. Now, I don't think it's ever easy to satisfy the masses on that, because if you take the ballot away and do it first come, first serve, there'll be people that say, well, I can't log online at that time because I'm at work. And that's fair enough. There'll be people that say, I've been really successful in the ballot. It's been great. And there are other people that say, I've won once in the entire season and we're in February now. Whatever you do, you can't please everyone. But I certainly think there's a better way of managing the ticketing than what we're seeing right now. This idea of like putting the tickets on sale at like 10 a.m. and making it difficult for people that are at work. Why don't you put them on sale at 8 p.m.? Okay, there'll be some people that are at work, but the vast majority will be able to access at that time. Why not do that? I know we've had problems with bots. I know there's been issues with other things as well. And there's been a lot of conversations back and forward. But whether it's fair or not, whether it's the right thing or not, there's something I don't like about being asked to log in and spend north of 90 quid for a Champions League game when I fork out so much for a season ticket already. And Rob makes the point in the chat here as well. He says, where is it? There we go. I'm not going to take my 2 home season tickets for PSV. They're £94 each. No thanks. Am I right in saying, Rob, that you're lower tier like me? Because I'm in block 6. Am I right in saying that you're a bit further around? Is that right? Correct me. I might be wrong. But if yours is £94 and you're in the lower tier, then mine's going to be similar. And that is a lot of money, man. That is a lot of money for a Champions League round of 16 game in not, certainly my seat. It's not the best view in the house, that's for sure. Great atmosphere. Love it. Love the people that I'm around, but it's not the best atmosphere. Oh, no, sorry. Roberts is in the upper 101. So yours will be more expensive than mine, but mine's still going to be 75 quid or whatever, surely. I'll have a look a little bit later on today and I'll get back to you on that one. But yeah, I just don't like it. I don't like the idea of, as a season ticket holder, being asked to log in and fork out more and more and more and more. And sort of, I know I want to go to the game and I know that, you got to pay for it, of course. But I think there should be more done to help the season ticket holders in that scenario. Khan says your brother must love you. Yeah, I think he enjoys the fact that I'm working a lot at the moment. Right, look, I'm gonna leave you all. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner. Always good fun trying to tackle a Q&A. Thank you for all your amazing questions that really helped and shaped the show, of course. Thank you for all your continued support. Remember, if you want to If you want to support us by going one further, if you want to become a patron, you can do so. Patreon.com/Chronicles of Laguna. And we're going to bring you match day reaction from the City Ground tonight, where Arsenal take on Nottingham Forest. Remember, leave a like on the video if you're watching us on YouTube. We're nowhere near the target that we set earlier on in the show. It's disappointing. Come on, like. It doesn't cost a thing. It's absolutely free. If you're with us on X, come over to YouTube, subscribe, all the rest of it. And I'll see you all very, very soon. Until the next one, take care of yourselves. Have a great day.